Welcome to part 8 of Let's Play The Legend of Zelda. Last part we got the 7th Triforce piece, meaning we only have to get one more to complete the Triforce of Wisdom, and after that it's time to take down Ganon. Also, we got the rat candle, I guess. Now let's actually try to use the recorder to warp to a different dungeon, and not the same dungeon. Let's try that again, this time facing up instead of down, so it will send me to a different one. Also, a tornado. Not a very common form of transportation, but it works. Now let's try that one more time to get to Dungeon 2, which is very close to Dungeon 8, so I just saved us a whole lot of walking. Besides, there's not really anything to get in the overworld anymore, we're pretty much done. It's actually a bit of an empty feeling. But hey, we can get a move on at least. Also, Dungeon 7 and 8 are both hidden, but whereas Dungeon 7 was sort of nicely underneath a lake, Dungeon 8 is sort of in a random bush. Granted, this one does actually stick out a little compared to other ones, but it's still just one of the 10 million bush in this game. We used the candle to burn the bush, and that's actually the last time we're gonna see the candle. After this, never again. I mean, fire properties are still nice, and we still have those dark rooms we need to lighten up, but you'll see in just a minute. And oh look, it's Manhandla, and that's not the last we see of him, because just like the last dungeon had a bunch of easy mini-bosses, this one has the slightly more difficult mini-bosses. It also has mostly the same enemies, but in this case it's Dark Nuts and Pulse Voices, which, again, the same like Dungeon 7, just a lot more difficult. Though no real Wizrows, and thank god no like-likes. Oh, but it has bubbles, which can disable your sword, which is not very good when you're dealing with Dark Nuts. So, again, like Dungeon 7, it doesn't have a lot of enemy variety, but at least it's slightly more interesting than the same really easy ones in Dungeon 7. I don't know why I keep harping on Dungeon 7. Not to mention 7 is a stupid number. And right off the bat we get a stopwatch, so I think we're off to a pretty good start. By the way, when Link flashes all those colors when he's using the stopwatch, one of them has red and white, and if you pause the game at the right moment, you can kinda make him look like Santa Claus, and it's funny. And look at that, 2 minutes in and we already get our dungeon item. Granted, there are 2 items in this dungeon, so that one's a bit later though, so I guess that one is more of a reward than this one. This is more so preparation for this dungeon, a little dungeon gift. But maybe I should actually talk about the item. The item we just got is the Book of Magic, and what it does is make the rat candle useless by pretty much giving the rod all the properties of the candle. It creates a little flame which can light up the room and burn bushes and all that jazz. I hear that some people don't like picking up the book because it makes it that the magical rod can't go through walls anymore, since it creates the little flame whenever it collides with something. But I prefer picking up the book because, first of all, it saves time on trying to lighten up dark rooms so that I won't have to switch items to the red candle, which I don't really use for anything else. And not to mention the extra bit of damage the flame can do to enemies, which is, well, it's just convenient. Also, fun fact, instead of being called the magical book, in the Japanese version it's called the Bible, because again, there was gonna be a lot more Christianity in Hyrule at first. And they changed it, thankfully. Though, then again, now we'll never get Bible Warriors, Skyward Cross, Lucifer's Mask, Twilight Jesus. If I remember the map correctly, there are a few rooms to the left here I don't visit. What you'll find there are 2 keys, and honestly I just don't really need the keys at this point, especially considering the other item in this dungeon. And if you go left and up from this room, then you'll find a Goma, which after defeating it will open a door to another hint. And the hint will be, after I actually can find it on my notes, Spectacle Rock is an entrance to death, which is a hint to where you can find the final dungeon. Spectacle Rock, I suppose, refers to 2 big rocks next to each other, so they look like glasses. And the entrance to death is because the final dungeon is called Death Mountain, but when something says entrance to death, I assume I'm gonna die when I go there, so that sounds like something I should more so be staying away from. Other than that, I think I visit every room in this dungeon except one to the right of the very beginning to the dungeon, where, again, you'll just find a key. I don't know why now all of a sudden I start skipping rooms where really I could have afforded to do that a bit more in the beginning. Yet at the same time, I sort of wish I showed off a bit more of the hints. In hindsight, I really wish I did a slightly better job with this playthrough as a whole. At least in terms of ignoring what I should ignore and showing off what I want to show off. At the same time though, I did really want to get all the maps and the compasses to at least keep it a little bit more authentic, even though I really don't need any of that. The point is, I don't necessarily show the quickest way through a dungeon. I try to be more efficient while also trying to show everything off. The third dungeon especially would have gone by a lot quicker if I chose to not show off one of the hints, but I did want to show off some hints while apparently ignoring others. I don't really remember what my mentality was when making these maps. There were occasions where I really didn't need to fight enemies, but did it anyway, but you know, what's done, it's done, and I'm not necessarily ashamed of this playthrough. I never died, I get all of the items, and I space out the time between the dungeons and the overworld, and that's what I really wanted to do. Right now I'm just talking about how I like doing playthroughs. Though I guess in future playthroughs I'll try to spend a bit more time between wasting time and showing things off. Especially considering the fact that I have a tendency to run out of things to talk about. Also talk way too fast sometimes. Also, Goma is back! He's blue now. I'm not sure if he himself is any different, but I do know that the room he's in right now is a bit more aggressive. Actually, I think the Goma we fought in Dungeon 6 went down in just one arrow, and this one took 3 arrows to the eye, so he's a bit more difficult, by which I mean it takes longer. Again, it might not always be immediately obvious, but the blue variety of enemies tend to be more difficult than their orange ones. I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, but it will be in the title of the video, so it won't matter. This dungeon is called the Lion Dungeon, and if you look at the dungeon map, it has the face of a lion. And that also has to do with the item we're about to get in just a few minutes. Look at that poor Dark Knight in the middle. Come on guys, let me out. This isn't fun anymore. Oh, look at that, the Dark Knights also have crosses on their shield, so we're not on the same side but follow the same god? That's not unheard of. Different interpretations, different side of the same coin. Yes, I'm actually drawing religious parallels about an 8-bit game. And yet, 0 religious parallels in Castlevania with all its holy water and its throwing crosses around. But really, I should talk about something else. I'm trying to kill this poor Dark Knight while he's trapped. I feel kinda bad for it. There's really nothing he could do about that. But oh, it's dungeon item time! Again, because we already got the book. This is the magical key, and like the dungeon itself, it has the head of a lion. And if you take a look at the key icon, it is now an A. I'm not sure what the A stands for. Maybe it stands for any door. But it eliminates the need for any other key. I still had 2 keys on hand, and there were a bunch of keys I ignored in this dungeon and other dungeons, so if you go out of your way for every single key in this game, you're gonna have 0 problem, and for some reason the final dungeon still gives you keys, so you don't really have to pick this one up. But just because you don't have to doesn't mean it's not convenient. Also keep in mind that while I did get most of the keys, I didn't open any of the doors I didn't have to open, so I really don't know what the door-to-key ratio in this game is, but that's why the later games will just have keys exclusive to the dungeon. Also the reason it really hasn't appeared anywhere else outside of the first 2 games. Which is a shame because it's still really convenient. Oh, by the way, because I know we're coming up to something, I actually looked up translations for what the hints are in Japanese. They're not literal translations, they're a ballpark to what they're actually saying as opposed to the horrible mistranslation we got in the English version. And I'm only gonna read out the more confusing ones. The ones that are pretty decently translated I'll skip over, so here goes. The most random one is one that has nothing to do with the original text. The man in the first dungeon that says, "Eastmost Peninsula is the secret." In the Japanese version he says, "You can't use arrows if you run out of money." I guess the translator thought, I'ma take some creative liberties by making entirely 0 sense. Because none of those 2 things have anything to do with each other. The next one is translated differently but for a good reason. It is, "Secret power is said to be in the arrow." In the Japanese version he says, "There are some creatures that are weak to sound." That refers to the enemies on screen right now, the pulse voices. Again, in the Japanese version there was a microphone and you could use that to take down these enemies. In the English version they decided to make them weak against arrows. But you know, using a potion just now made a pretty annoying sound and didn't do shit to them. Then in Dungeon 6 we found a man who said, "There are secrets where fairies don't live." And I actually guessed that one correctly, because it refers to the entrance to Dungeon 7, because in the Japanese version he says, "There is a secret in the pond without a fairy," and it's a little more clearer because it actually refers to the pond. This one's a little strange because the one in Dungeon 7 was more of a mix-up. In the English version he says, "There's a secret in the tip of the nose." In the Japanese version he says, "Spectacle Rock is an entrance to death," which is a hint we got earlier in this dungeon, so that one just got switched around, I suppose. As for the nose thing, I have no idea what the fuck that means. But again, for some reason they moved the Spectacle Rock hint here, even though the hint here was supposed to be, "Look for the arrows in Death Mountain," which is a pretty clear hint. There are a few more in Dungeon 9 I'll talk about later, but first we have one more in this dungeon, which is, it's my favorite. 10th enemy has the bomb. I have no idea what that is referring to. It is so random. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything. In the Japanese version he says, "Look for the lion key." That makes sense. There is a key in this dungeon. It is shaped like a lion. Just, where the hell did the bomb thing come from? Also, the Grumble Grumble guy, that one is exactly the same in the Japanese version, even though it looks like it is a translation. Anyway, it's boss time. What is twice as hard than fighting a two-headed dragon? Fighting a four-headed dragon. Luckily I have more than enough health to just stand next to him and whack him a few times. Also, I didn't show it off, but in Dungeon 6 you can fight this boss as a mini-boss where it has 3 heads, or the middle child as I like to call him. But that is it for this dungeon. We get our final Triforce piece, meaning we completed the Triforce of Wisdom, meaning that next time we can take down Ganon. So see you next time in the final part of Let's Play The Legend of Zelda. See you then.